NRA was saying that.
Good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, March 1st. I'm Yasmin Vasugian alongside Louis Bergdorf. In an extraordinary on-camera discussion on school safety, President Trump leaving lawmakers on both sides of the aisle pretty stunned as he unleashed his negotiating tactics in real time on how to reform gun laws in this country. At several points, the president not only sided against his Republican colleagues, but the powerful NRA as well. NBC News White House correspondent Kristen Welker has more on this meeting.
Mass shootings.
Under pressure after Parkland, President Trump taking on his own party and the National Rifle Association.
And I'm a fan of the NRA, but that doesn't mean we have to agree on everything.
Mr. Trump at a freewheeling hour-long meeting with a group of bipartisan lawmakers trying to get something, anything done, appeared to embrace nearly everything he heard in the meeting, from confiscating guns from those deemed dangerous, a move opposed by many conservatives.
But take the guns first, go through due process second.
And embracing long-held Democratic ideas like universal background checks and increasing the minimum age to 21 to buy some weapons, even taking on red state Democrat Joe Manchin and Republican Pat Toomey for not including an age limit increase in their background check bill.
We didn't address it, Mr. President. Look, I think
you know why? Because you're afraid of the NRA, right?
No.
At times, wheeling and dealing in real time.
If you can add domestic violence, paragraphs, pages into this bill, I'm all for it. But can you add what Amy and what Diane have? Can we add them in? And I know you can add what John.
Even pushing back against fellow Republican Steve Scalise, shot and nearly killed during a baseball practice last summer when Scalise suggested adding a measure involving a concealed weapons permit to a bill aimed at strengthening background checks.
If you look at the concealed carry population,
we're talking about a whole new ballgame. You'll never get this passed. If you add concealed carry to this, you'll never get it passed.
The president also reaffirming his commitment to pass an executive order banning bump stocks, those devices that turn weapons into assault-style firearms. His message to lawmakers, the time to act is now.
I see some folks that don't say nice things about me, and that's okay. Because if you turn that into this energy, I'll love you.
Despite all of the bargaining, one White House official acknowledges any new gun legislation still faces very steep odds. Gun reform, after all, has been nearly impossible in this country for decades, including after the Sandy Hook massacre, which claimed the lives of 20 children. Yasmin.
Pretty surprising stuff there. Thanks to Kristen Welker for that report. Meanwhile, yet another poll finds wide support for tougher gun measures. This one from Politico and Morning Consult, taken more than a week after the Parkland school massacre. The survey found 88% of registered voters support universal background checks. 70% support a ban on high-capacity magazines, while 68% want a ban on assault-style rifles.
And this morning, there are new questions about conflicts of interest in the president's inner circle. The New York Times reports that the family company of Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, received huge loans after meeting with the lender's executives in the White House. $184 million from Apollo Global Management to refinance Kushner Company's mortgage on a Chicago skyscraper, and $325 million from Citigroup to finance office buildings in Brooklyn. When Kushner stepped down as CEO to work at the White House, he sold a small portion of his stake in the company to a trust controlled by his mother, but he retained the vast majority of his interests. The Times reports that Joshua Harris, a founder of the private equity firm Apollo Global Management, was advising the Trump administration on infrastructure policy early last year when he met on multiple occasions with Kushner. According to three people familiar with the meetings, among other things, the two men discussed a possible White House job for Harris. Now, Citigroup's $325 million loan came in the spring of 2017, shortly after Kushner met in the White House with Chief Executive Michael Corbett, according to people briefed on that meeting. Now, the two men talked about financial and trade policy and did not discuss Kushner's family business. That's according to what one person said. Now, a spokesman for Kushner's attorney said Kushner has met with hundreds of business people and that he has taken no part of any business loans or projects with or for Kushner companies since joining the White House, and that he has followed the ethics advice cited.
Chaotic White House. Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, his senior advisor, reportedly got big loans for his family business after he met with top Wall Street executives at the White House. That's according to the New York Times. Kushner also described as acting paranoid. A CNN source says Kushner feels everyone is out to get him after losing his top secret security clearance and in the middle of his pitched battle with Chief of Staff John Kelly. A White House insider saying the president is increasingly frustrated with all the enemies General Kelly is making. And there's also the latest crisis of the president's own making, his public shaming of his own hand-picked attorney general. The president tweeting today, why is AG Jeff Sessions asking the inspector general to investigate potentially massive FISA abuse? Will take forever, has no prosecutorial power, and already late with reports on Comey, etc. Isn't the IG an Obama guy? Why not use Justice Department lawyers? Disgraceful. So to answer the president's questions, the inspector general, Michael Horowitz, is investigating because that's his job. And none of this is really what the president is steamed about. That's not what he's steamed about. It's not what he's mad about. He continues to blame Jeff Sessions for the Mueller investigation. And now tonight, we have learned Mueller is looking into exactly why Trump wanted to oust Sessions last summer. And here we go again. News that on any other night would be our top story. President Trump holds a live, televised meeting on guns with Republicans and Democrats and ends up sounding an awful lot like a Democrat, calling for a ban on bump stocks, strengthening background checks, and raising the age of gun purchases from 18 to 21. Remember when gun advocates love to say, they still love to say that Obama wants to take away your guns. Now Trump actually does. Listen.
Take the firearms first and then go to court. A lot of times by the time you go to court, it takes so long to go to court to get the due process procedures. I like taking the guns early.
So a recap just on the open of this show. Bombshell resignations, White House infighting, guns, all of that, and it's only Wednesday. So let's bring in now CNN senior White House correspondent Jeff Selny. Jeff, so let's see, where do we start? The White House under a barrage of bad headlines tonight. What's the latest?
Don, certainly a busy day on a variety of fronts here at the White House, as you covered there. I mean, there was this dramatic session in the cabinet room of the White House this afternoon that seemed to really be the driving story of the day here, if you will, with the president having this session with Democrats and Republicans sitting down trying to broker a deal on guns. He said, do not be petrified by the NRA. He said that now is the time to do something. Literally minutes after that meeting broke up, news came from the White House that Hope Hicks, the communications director, one of the closest advisors to the president, said she was resigning. So, of course, that in some ways overshadowed that entire NRA meeting. Again, this morning, the president going after his attorney general, Jeff Sessions, once again, which has become this repeated sort of series of events here, always going after Jeff Sessions, who was, of course, an early supporter, early advisor on the campaign. So, Don, as we end a busy Wednesday here, the White House still pushing guns, but there is this staff shakeup, this resignation that really is different than all the others. We've been through this before. We've been here before saying this person resigned, that person resigned. Hope Hicks is different, Don.
Yeah. But who has five communications directors in just over a year? I mean, I hate to laugh. It's laughable. I just cannot. Who can believe this?
Right. But, Don, it's even more than that. Yes, she had the title of communications director, but it is much more than that. Hope Hicks was more than the communications director. Right. She was the Trump whisperer. That she understood him, and she, in many respects, her voice was not known outside. You know, we see a lot of people on Sunday talk shows. We see them advising, presidents and sort of, out here on the lawn giving interviews. This was not Hope Hicks, but her voice inside was very loud and very clear. She was involved in virtually every big story. The president was involved in every big speech. She traveled with him. And, Don, I'm remembering tonight thinking back to a trip last July when the president was flying back from Hamburg, Germany, the G20, back here to Washington. Hope Hicks was on that plane. I was on that plane as a pool reporter after this long foreign trip. And that was the time, we didn't know it at the moment, where they were devising the communication strategy for that Trump Tower meeting from 2016. Hope Hicks was in the room as they were talking about, wait, this wasn't about adoptions for Russia. It was about dirt on Hillary Clinton. So that, I was thinking about that again today, Don. Hope Hicks was present for every station of this situation, which is one of the reasons she spent 8 hours yesterday, of course, before the House Intelligence Committee. She spent 2 days before Bob Mueller's team at the end of last year. So all that builds up to, is it why she resigned today? We don't know. She said she wanted to pursue other opportunities. But, Don, I can tell you there was a ripple effect that was felt here. I was told that people were crying when she was saying that she was leaving. She is a force here in the White House that will be leaving in the coming weeks. And my question, how will the president deal without his aide next to him? He can call out hope, hope. For all these variety of things. So this was a bigger deal than a lot of resignations.
Without his Trump whisperer, again, as she is called. Thank you. I appreciate that. I want to bring in now Chris Eliza, CNN Politics Editor at Large, Joshua Green, CNN Political Analyst and the author of Devil's Bargain, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency, and CNN Political Analysts April Ryan and Ryan Lizza. So, Chris, it's interesting when he talks about her being the Trump whisperer, that she's been there for him. She was very low-key. I remember inauguration night was the first time I'd ever met her and really heard, her name, besides maybe reading it on a statement from the White House. She was not very visible. And so you don't know who Hope Hicks? I said, no, I don't know Hope Hicks. But you're not buying her resignation, are you?
Well, first, to your first point about her low profile, to go from Anthony Scaramucci to Hope Hicks is literally the biggest contrast in profile you could ever possibly have. But no. Jeff touched on this. She said she told Maggie Haberman, or aides told Maggie Haberman in the New York Times that she left because this was the perfect time to leave. It's the it's the opposite of the perfect time to leave. You just went through the number of stories, Don. That's just today. And really, that's just this afternoon.
Yeah, because yesterday, a similar open to the show, there was so much news. It was like 4 or 5 stories, either of which could have been the big story or the only story we covered.
And would have been in any other administration. So to me, her leaving now, a day after the testimony in the House Intelligence Committee, a few weeks after the whole security clearances issue with Rob Porter, who she was romantically linked. She is leaving at a time, and Jeff noted this, she's leaving at a time when Donald Trump is increasingly isolated, has fewer and fewer of that core group that he started with.
Well, let me ask you this. But then why then would he berate her after her testimony? Because she said she told white lies. And I like to say, hashtag, that was trending today, hashtag white lies matter, because they do really matter.
Well, if you lie about little things, you know how that ends, right? I mean, yes. My guess is because he was upset at her because he is smart enough to understand that it is very hard for a communications person whose job ostensibly is to deal with the media to be saying, well, yeah, I mean, I tell some things that aren't true. It's nothing substantive, nothing important.
How do we know what to believe?
Credibility-wise, you're left in a lurch there, and my guess is he sensed that.
But he also, Trump himself adheres to the Roy Cohn standard of, always attack, never admit any wrongdoing. Trump himself will never admit that he's lied, never apologize, and I think he expects that from his staff too.
Yeah. April, this is your beat. What are you hearing?
Well, I'm hearing she was forced to resign, that she and General Kelly, no surprise, that she and General Kelly have not been seeing eye to eye, particularly since this Rob Porter issue. When she wrote that statement about Rob Porter and his leaving and what was going on, and my sources are telling me that she delivered a tentative resignation at that time, but they said stay. You've got some more things you got to do. You've got these hearings, so stay. But yesterday was the nail in the coffin. That white lie was the nail in the coffin for this president and for the administration. So what's next, we don't know, but we do know that this White House is trying to act like everything is okay. We know that everything is not okay because they knew this was coming. They purposefully, strategically canceled a briefing today because they were fearful that we would get information about this and start talking about it to overshadow the gun issue, the other story, well, one of the other stories of the day. So this has been a very interesting day, and we have to see how it plays out. But Hope Hicks is leaving, but the president has other people in the administration that he could definitely have as a whisperer. I've said it before. Kellyanne, when the president gets in hot water on the Twitter, Kellyanne says, "Sir, how can I help you?" Meaning, how can I help you fix this? So, the president, he likes people 1 minute. But once they do something, he'll throw them away for a minute. But then they start calling him on his cell phone, and they're friends again. But, we'll see what happens. But this one was a hard blow.
How do you fix that? Because, one of the people you mentioned, and there are others, they're so gaffe-prone that how do you fix something? Sometimes they try to fix it, and they end up making it worse. At least Hope Hicks was not enamored by
yeah,
cameras and fame.
Right.
She was the perfect communications director. Everyone else who seems to be in those roles want to be. They never met a green room they didn't like. They never. The roughest place, the most dangerous place to be was between them and a camera. Even still, they often end up making it worse.
She's now sick of Washington.
Yeah.
She's now sick of Washington because she's been the eye of the storm at least 3 times.
Yeah, and so young. This is not what she signed up for. She signed up originally to work with Ivanka Trump on her fashion line. Let me bring Ryan in. Ryan, remember the New York Times reporting last year where President Trump lashed out at John Kelly, and Kelly told other White House staff that in his 35 years of military service, he had never been spoken to like that. And we have seen this story before, but this time it looks like it's a dramatic consequence.
Well, I mean, sometimes it feels like half of White House reporting is just about who Trump is mad at that day, right? Every senior White House official goes through some cycle of, Trump venting at them. So that was, that was Kelly's time in the barrel. This job of White House communications director, it's sort of become like the drummer in Spinal Tap, if you guys remember that movie. I mean, people just sort of leave in sort of unusual circumstances, some more spectacularly than others. Scaramucci's was probably the most spectacular. He was a sort of the shortest and maybe more like that, sort of like the drummer who self-combusted in the movie. Hope lasted a long time. I mean, she was doing this job even when other people had the title. But at the end of the day, Trump is his own communications director, and that's, I think, why this job is so impossible to fill in the way that previous presidents have had communications directors, because he's very difficult to work for in any capacity, but especially when it comes to press and communications, which he thinks he is a master of.
Yeah. So, but just, Josh, don't you look at this graphic. This is the president's original inner circle that went with him from the early days of the campaign to the White House. Well, actually, there were just a couple from the early days. Some of those people are not early. I mean, but anyway, how many are left here? The president is increasingly isolated.
Well, if you take away family members, there's not a whole lot of people left from the early days. And the real shock, I think, with Hope Hicks leaving, I was speaking to a former White House official today, just after the news broke, who said he was really stunned. He said, as tough as that job is on people, I expected Hope to be the one to turn out the lights on the Trump administration, that she would be there for the full 4 or 8 years. Now, I don't know if that was realistic, but I think it speaks to how jarring it was for people who work with her to see her, kind of arbitrarily decide to leave, especially in the middle of all the crises that are ongoing. The other issue that came up in my reporting was, look, she's spoken to Mueller. Maybe that's a reason she's left. If she has reason to believe that perhaps she is a target of this investigation, maybe now is a time to leave and get some distance from the White House if things are going to go in a bad direction.
Hey, Chris, I got to take a break, but quickly, and how much of this, I was sitting in my office and I was watching all of the news channels, right? Trump TV, or state-run TV, they're not even reporting this. So the Trump supporters, they don't even know about these stories. It doesn't even register. That's the amazing thing. We cover all of these things every day. The White House imploding behind him, and he's standing there going, nothing to see here. But his supporters probably don't even realize the extent of it.
Yes, there's no question. Particularly when he tweets about why don't we pay attention to Hillary's crimes, number one. Number two, though, I actually think for people who are just consuming news generally, the top of the show, Don, I would think there's an episode of The Simpsons where Mr. Burns, the old, sort of decrepit guy, just stay with me, the old decrepit guy goes to the doctor, and he said that he has a checkup, and the doctor comes in and says, you're actually perfectly fine. He says, I knew it, I was healthy. And the doctor says, no, it's not that. You have every disease known to man, but they're all blocking one another from attacking your body. I sometimes think about that with the news cycle. I don't know if he's doing it on purpose or not. Some people say, oh, of course he's doing it on purpose. It's 8-dimensional chess. I don't know if that's true, but I do know that, like, Ben Carson and the stuff going on with the furniture in his office. Jared Kushner. We're talking about Hope Hicks, but the Russia investigation. I mean, there's so much. You could literally do an entire show on just the guns.
Well, hang on, because you guys are coming back. Okay, so stand by. Don't work ahead in the textbook.
I used a lot of time there. Sorry,
oh, my gosh. We'll be back. We got to talk about all that stuff that he mentioned. Don't go anywhere. Our breaking news tonight, the bombshell resignation of Hope Hicks, just one day after we learned Jared Kushner's security clearance has been downgraded. And that's not the only bombshell coming out of the Trump White House. There's also news on Robert Mueller's investigation and questions about President Trump's feud with Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Back with me now, Chris Aliza, Joshua Green, April Ryan, and Ryan Liza. Because Chris read ahead in the notebook.
I blame myself.
I'm going to give this to Ryan. So Ryan, as we're dissecting all the news about Hope Hicks and really everything that's come out in the last 48 hours, the Washington Post is reporting that Mueller Mueller is examining Trump's apparent efforts to oust Sessions in July and whether this is a part of a pattern of obstruction of justice. What do you make of this development?
Well, I think it's entirely predictable. It's as predictable as the earlier story this week that foreigners were trying to gain an advantage over Kushner by figuring out what kind of what his weaknesses are with respect to his financial dealings. Just as that is entirely predictable, it is predictable that given his financial entanglements and given the nature of his job, he was inevitably going to meet with officials who then had some business relationship, right? So sometimes these things are totally innocent. Maybe he met with this guy from Citigroup and then the company got the loan, as the Post is reporting, and one had nothing to do with the other. But that is the problem when you don't divest. That is the problem when you have these kinds of financial entanglements. It is the appearance of, frankly, corruption. And that's why we have previous administrations who have been very, very stringent about divesting themselves of these kinds of relationships and making sure, or at the very least, making sure they don't take a meeting with someone who might have a financial relationship later on with one of their business interests. So entirely predictable, and another sort of nail in the coffin. He's had a very, very difficult month, and to me, it's very difficult to see how he remains in that job without a top secret clearance, with Mueller breathing down his neck, and with increasing stories about financial entanglements that are making his job very difficult.
Josh, I want to read this graph. It's from the Post story. It says, behind the scenes, Trump has derisively referred to Sessions as Mr. Magoo, a cartoon character who is elderly, myopic, and bumbling, according to people with whom he has spoken. Trump has told associates that he has hired the best lawyers for his entire life, but is stuck with Sessions, who is not defending him and is not sufficiently loyal. What do you make of that comparison, the president feeling like Sessions isn't being sufficiently loyal? It's another loyalty oath, right?
Right. It says to me he doesn't understand the role of Attorney General and the Attorney General's relationship to the president. Jeff Sessions' job is not to be Donald Trump's personal lawyer, and I don't think Trump has ever reconciled himself to that fact or wants to. He sees the job of Jeff Sessions as to go out there and to defend him, to investigate and attack his enemies. He tweeted just today that why isn't Jeff Sessions having Justice Department lawyers go out and investigate Hillary Clinton, who hasn't been a political figure in 18 months and isn't going to be one. This is just, loyalty is the lens through which he views everything, but especially lawyers.
I've got to get to the gun thing, okay? Because today was meant to focus on President's roundtable with lawmakers, focusing on gun control. They even canceled a briefing to highlight it. But once again, the White House steps all over their own message with this resignation. Do you think this is another self-inflicted wound, April?
Yes, but even more so than that, I'm waiting to hear what the NRA has to say. This is the first time in modern years, in the most recent presidents that we've seen, for a Republican president to not stand in lockstep with the NRA. It was very strong today. The president said he wanted something stronger than weaker. He was talking about issues of background checks, mental health. He was doubling down again on certifying those who can handle a gun in schools. I mean, he really went in. And the question is that will the NRA go against this Republican president? I mean, they've talked about many years before with Democratic presidents when they were talking about the gun show loophole issue and different things, that they're trying to take your guns away. Well, now this president, this Republican president, who just became Republican not long ago, the last couple of years, is now saying we need to do something. He even said he had dinner or lunch with members of the NRA about this. So I mean, yeah, this Hope Hicks issue is a big issue for the moment, but I think this has more tentacles and a longer battle, if you will, to come.
Yeah, my mouth dropped when he said take the guns and then due process, and I said, wait a minute, did he just say yep, I'm going to take your guns away, which he said about Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, which by the way, Barack Obama never, there was no legislation, nothing to ever say.
Well, he in fact said, Barack Obama said, I have no interest in coming to your house to take your guns away.
I was like,
you
what?
And every Republican lawmaker in the room, Don, in terms of your jaw dropping. Look, in watching it, I just couldn't escape the Tuesday immigration open meeting that we saw where Donald Trump essentially said, in his own unique way, we can do comprehensive immigration reform. By Thursday, 48 hours later, that was off the table and they weren't doing anything. what he says in an open setting, he is not someone with a lot of deeply held beliefs.
Yes.
He doesn't care that what he says.
He'll say that today, but then he'll say something else
and he won't
on
think
Thursday or Friday. Right? But today I kept thinking as I'm watching this, honestly, our lawmakers are completely out of touch with what the American people really want. Especially these kids, many of them. These kids, a lot of them are older. The younger generation, I think they're not part of, they don't really about anything. I saw this as performance art.
But if you need to understand what the Republican Party's reaction to Donald Trump, broadly speaking, is, I would urge anyone to go find the video of John Cornyn, the Texas Republican senator, sitting next to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
John Cornyn's face tells it all.
Yeah,
he looks like this half time.
Yeah.
Like I hear that right? I mean, that's just the reality. And that's what Trump, the great opportunity Trump represented in some ways. The break with the orthodoxy, the break with the ways in which things used to be. The problem is you have no idea whether he's going to do it.
The difference is when you have
But wait a minute, Don, he says he wants to deal with bump stocks. He says he wants to deal with bump stocks. He says he's going to write some kind of executive order to deal with bump stocks. He wants them to deal with everything else. It sure could have, but I'm just saying, not taking up for him, but he says he wants to deal with the issue of bump stocks. He's going to do that right away, and the rest of that the congressional leaders can handle. He didn't understand a lot of the legislation, but he says he wants some action. So we'll see what what happens and how long this bump stock thing will take.
All right, I'm going to get bumped out of here if you guys don't hold your horses. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. When we come back with all this chaos swirling in the White House, how does the administration get anything done? Is there agenda on the line? I'm going to ask Mark McKinnon right after this. We've said it before, but Team Trump proves it over and over in this White House and all this chaos. Communications Director Hope Hicks, one of the president's closest aides, the latest to go through the revolving door. One day after telling a congressional committee that she sometimes tells white lies for the president. Mark McKinnon is here. Let's discuss. He's a former advisor to George W. Bush and John McCain, who is executive producer of The Circus. Good to see you, sir. So, Mark, on most days, the president sitting down with lawmakers for a televised bipartisan meeting would be front page news. Instead, the White House is dealing with headlines like Trump calls Sessions handling of surveillance abuse allegations disgraceful. Mueller investigation examining Trump's apparent efforts to oust Sessions in July. Jared Kushner's ties to banks under scrutiny. The White House denies Trump berated Hope Hicks. I mean, look at all this. We have those headlines up on the screen there. I mean, that's just from the last few hours. How can this White House get anything done?
Well, it's dizzying, Don, and as you know, this isn't just today. This is every day, and I had to talk to your producers this morning, as I do every week, and we talk about what we're probably going to talk about tonight, and then sure enough, by late afternoon, it's a completely different set of issues. You know, working in the White House, I call it the human microwave, under normal circumstances. And so I just want to echo something that Maggie Haberman just tweeted out, which is that the surprise should not be that anybody's leaving. The surprise is that anybody's staying. But in this case, Hope Hicks, obviously, it is a big deal for everybody because, for a lot of reasons. I mean, one is that she's so close to Trump. Two, everybody assumed that she'd be there for most of the ride anyway. And that she and his former personal assistant, Keith Schiller, were such security blankets for him that people are worried what's going to happen in a pretty chaotic White House and executive with them there, what it's going to be like without them there. And so Hope Hicks is just an interesting person, and particularly intriguing to those of us in the communications business as a communications director who, in a couple of years of a campaign and more than a year as communications director in some capacity at the White House, has been seen on camera once, which I commend. You know, she facilitated press but tried to stay out of it. But as we saw in the last couple of weeks, she's suddenly in the hot glare of the spotlight, and I don't think she liked it a bit.
Yeah, and if you've met her, like I said in the beginning of the show, I only met her once. Could not be nicer, but I mean, she was, you know, really in the mixer there, in the grinder. But listen, our Pamela Brown has been reporting that the president has made clear that he needs Jared and Ivanka to stay on board since they're the only ones he feels that he can trust. The president has publicly criticized McMaster, Sessions, Tillerson, and reportedly berated Hope Hicks, arguably one of the most loyal foot soldiers. Do you think Trump's loyalty, which seems only to extend to his family, do you think that's going to hurt him?
Yeah, I think it already has, and I think you know, I'm not one of those who says that nobody connected to a family should work for a president under any circumstances. I think there are circumstances, although in the Bush administrations, in 8 years of George W. and 4 years of George H.W., I'm not aware of a single family member that worked in any capacity. Now, there may be some that I'm just not aware of, but if they were, it was certainly low level, not a high security, special assistant to the president without portfolio. The problem with that is that even if there is no conflict of interest, there's always going to be the appearance of that. And we saw that with Jared Kushner today, where he gets a couple of loans from large corporate interests who have been at the White House in meetings with him. So how can there not be at least the appearance of a conflict? And when you're president and you're trying to get stuff done, you don't even want the appearance of that. So, how there's an agenda now with this kind of chaos for this year, I don't think it's going to be much of one through the midterms.
No. Wow. Well, the president punted to John Kelly to deal with the security clearance problem in the wake of Rob Porter, and Kelly promptly downgraded Kushner's clearance. Do you think that it's going to end up hurting him with the president?
I hope not. I mean, I think that a lot of people believe that even those who become skeptical that John Kelly's presence is a good presence there because he is concerned about those kind of conflicts, although he didn't raise it as early as he should have. But I think from the beginning, he's been concerned about the relationship of the family with Trump in the White House. Yeah. I think those are the kind of conflicts that that as a military guy, he just instinctively got. So I think it's going to be an ongoing problem until it's resolved one way or the other, until their roles are either diminished or exported, or Kelly goes.
Listen, I always ask you questions that I want to, but I want to know what questions do you have? What's important to you? Is there something that we're missing here? Because there's so many stories. What's on your mind tonight?
Well, what's on my mind is ramping up the circus here in a couple of weeks with 18 new episodes in season 3, and how we're going to cover this. You like that segue?
I do. I like that shameless self-promotion. But go on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But it just reminds me that there are so many sort of arrows coming at us every day that what we fail to understand, I think, because it's so scattershot and so asymmetric, what is the bigger picture of the Mueller investigation, for example? We don't know, but we get so drawn into all these other things. So my questions are kind of, what's the bigger picture for the presidency, for the executive, for the country long term? And are these guardrails of democracy going to hold up over time?
You can't go live on Showtime, can you? Because you may have to end up doing that this season.
Yeah, no, I mean, we keep changing. I mean, the executives see the show Sunday morning, and it goes on Sunday night, and oftentimes we're changing stuff late Saturday night, given this administration, how much happens.
When does the new season start again?
April 15th. Thanks for asking.
We'll see you then. Thank you, Mark McKinnon. Always a pleasure.
Right,
thank you so much. When we come back, the President and his Attorney General publicly feuding over the Justice Department's Inspector General. Why can't they just get along? And who is right? I'm going to speak to a former Inspector General for the NSA about all of this next.